you, Michael. It's so good to be with you all, though I wish I could be there in person. If any of our sound is not coming through well, please do gesticulate wildly. We don't actually see anyone in the room aside from Michael at the podium. So yeah, feel free to let us know. So
You sound good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Michael. So I'm KJ Rawson. I am a professor of English and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Northeastern University. I'm the director of the Digital Transgender Archive, and I'm also the chair of the board for the Homosaurus LGBTQ+ linked data vocabulary. I'm a white trans guy. I have brown hair and blue eyes. I'm wearing a brown striped sweater today. I should also say that I am living and working on the lands of the Nipmuc, the Massachusetts, and the Wampanoag people, and I am forever grateful for their continued stewardship of this land and this place. So I think what we're going to do is have each of the panelists introduce themselves more fully, and then I'll give you a sense of what we're going to be up to for the next hour. So Lou, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, KJ. Hi, everybody. My name is Lou McCarthy. I'm the Director of Archives at the LGBT Community Center in New York. I both live and work on the unceded lands that were originally stewarded by the Lenape people here in Manhattan, also known as Lenapehoking. I use the pronouns they, them, and theirs. I'm a trans masculine non-binary white person. I am actually one of, actually, Michael, I can't really see you, but I'm wearing glasses, unlike my other two panelists, unusual. And I have short brown hair and brown eyes.
Raegan?
Hi, my name is Raegan Swanson, she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director at the Archives, Canada's LGBTQ2+ archive. I'm a white cis lady, and I am actually newly blonde hair and wearing red lipstick and a black shirt. And I am coming to you from Toronto, which is the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat.
Thank you. Michael, did you have anything else you wanted to share by way of introduction?
I am Michael Radmacher, he, him. I have long hair, glasses, and I'm tall. That's how people describe me. I don't know. That's it.
Wonderful. Could you go to the next slide for us, please? Thank you. So this gives you a quick introduction to the structure of our panel. So we are here to not just speak broadly about the state of trans BIPOC archival collections, but to actually share with you a grant project that we have been collaborating on for the past 3 years. And so we have really been doing a pretty systematic deep dive into trans BIPOC collecting in a number of collections through the auspices of this grant. So what we're going to do today is first share with you a bit about what the grant was and is. Then we'll each take a few minutes to talk about the collections that we helped to steward and the ones that we were focusing on for the purposes of this grant. But really the majority of our time together will be in conversation. So we have a series of questions that we've prepared, and we're going to treat this a bit like a roundtable. So we'll have more off-the-cuff answers as we talk through these questions. Then we'll share with you some next steps, some things that we're thinking about as we move forward, and then we'll transition into the Q&A for the last 15 minutes. So we may not get to all the questions that we've prepared, but they'll at least give you a sense of the kinds of things that we've been thinking about as part of the outcomes of this grant. So Michael, if you could go to the next slide, please, that would be great. All right, so I hope many of you are already familiar with the Digital Transgender Archive. If you're not, I hope you will come visit our website. You can see the URL at the bottom of this slide. You can also find it pretty easily if you Google it. But the short version of the project is that the Digital Trans Archive is a freely available online collection of trans-related historical materials. We collaborate now with 92 different archives from 10 different countries. And what we have on our site is primarily digitized versions of physical materials. So the whole point of the project is to increase access to trans history. We have about 13,200 items on our site right now. and we're growing all of the time. This grant that you can see here is one that we received in 2022. The backstory for this project came about because as we were, so the Digital Transgender Archive was initially launched in 2016. And so I'd like to think that we're sort of middle-aged as digital projects go. And what I started to realize as the project really came into fruition and started to develop more robust collections is that we were problematically overrepresenting certain factions of trans communities. And in particular, we were focusing on white people, many of whom were assigned male at birth and who were cross-dressing periodically. And there's lots of reasons that we could unpack about why there are certain factions of trans communities that are overrepresented in archives. But essentially it boils down to power, right? Who has sufficient power to be able to document their lives, to collect those materials, to keep them preserved, to donate them to archives, et cetera. And so I realized that if we were just going to continue by collecting whatever was most available, we were going to just perpetuate this problem. So we needed to both apply for funding, but also really rethink some of the ways that we were doing our archiving as usual. So that is how this grant came about. It is a 10-member collaboration. So there are 3 of our collaborators that are part of this panel today. And what the whole purpose of this grant was to focus exclusively on digitizing trans BIPOC content. The outcome for it is to digitize 20,500 pages of mixed archival materials. I'm happy to tell you that we are surpassing that number quite significantly. So that was our initial plan. I think we'll be closer to 25,000 by the time that it's all said and done. Same thing with images. We had set out to digitize about 600. We'll probably double that. And 22 audiovisual items. We are at the tail end of the grant right now, but it will still take us a few more months to kind of wrap things up. But we have completed almost all of these outcomes so far. The other thing that we're doing is not just digitizing content, but trying to make sure that these resources are widely available. And so we developed an 8-part video series, which is already up on the site, as well as lesson plans, because we want to make it easier to use the content. The other thing that we have forthcoming in a few months is a 4-episode podcast, which I am just elated about. I don't even want to spoil it too much for you, but this is going to be such a phenomenal series. That I will be sure to spread the word and make sure that Moving Trans History Forward has it on all the social media accounts and everything, because it's going to be phenomenal. So that's coming out in May. So as I'm framing this panel, I also want to make sure to say that part of what we've been contending with as a grant project is that the majority of folks who are leading the archives that are partnered with this grant are white. The majority are also trans. But we have really had to reckon with some of the ways that there are systemic power dynamics and exclusions that are baked into the archives that we steward. And so a lot of what we have done in this project is not just digitize content, but think about the ways that we have confronted the kind of philosophy and ethics of the archiving as a whole. So to give you a sense of the ways that we've done that, we established a community board at the start of this grant, which is a 10-member trans BIPOC community board. And they have had decision-making power throughout this whole grant. So they have been deeply involved with helping us to identify the types of content that is digitized. And then also they have been helping to shape things like rewriting the DTA's mission statement and rewriting our scope guide. And we've also worked on a harm reduction guide that is a really extensive and detailed account of how we mitigate harm within our collections. So I think that's what I'll say for now by way of introduction. And I'm going to pass it off to Michael to talk a bit about the Trans Archives at UVic.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, KJ. So yes, Lara would be saying the following. So I'm happy to cover what what she was planning to say. So what she's going to be covering, and I'm happy to speak more to anyone who's attending the open house at the Transgender Archives today and tomorrow. I have 7 to 8 minutes here, but I'm happy to talk at length in person, so please stop on by. So the Transgender Archives, 60 years of activism, 120 years of trans plus research. Since 2007, we've been actively acquiring documents, rare publications, and memorabilia of persons and organizations associated with activism by and for trans plus people. And we officially launched in fall 2011. So our records span 160 meters, 530 linear feet, so that's a football field and a half for sports people. There you go. Go back 120 years, 15 languages, 23 countries on all continents except Antarctica. Next slide. So the major fonds that we are going to review today is the Ricky Swin Institute Collection, the University of Ulster, Reed Erickson, Ayanna Merkel, and Red Jordan Oroboto. So just a little bit about each of those. So the Ricky Swin Institute, so she was our founding donation. Hundreds of newsletters entitled, large collection of books. A big chunk of it is Fantasia Fair, and you may have noticed a poster in the lobby about a digitization project myself and my colleague Victor Altera Omni is working on. We can talk more about that later. That's actually part of the Ari Kane collection as well, which is a part of the Ricky Swin collection. International Foundation for Gender Education, so that's IFGE, the Virginia Prince Collection, and also video tapes, audio tapes, photos, and most issues of F2M newsletter. So the next one is the University of Ulster, so that's Northern Ireland, and that's the majority of our EU and UK collection. So founded in 1986 by Richard Eakins, and it was the first such collection in the world to be housed within a university setting. Reed Erickson and the Erickson Educational Foundation. So the Educational Foundation was in existence from 1964 to 1984. Erickson founded the Homophile Organization and One Inc., which turned into the One Archives that we would know today. He funded international conferences, which became WPATH, research funding, did all kinds of publications, films, TV, radio speakers. We have a really great collection in the open house about Reed Erickson's work that I'm happy to show you. And a lot of folks are interested in his New Age movement's interest. So we take it now for granted that dolphins communicate with each other. Reed Erickson funded that original research. He also was interested in dream research, and he also funded the first edition of A Course in Miracles, A Course in Miracles, yeah, in 1976. So the next collection is Ayanna Merkel. So she is a two-spirit, quote, transformed woman who loves women from 6 nations of Grand River, and that's in Ontario out east. Maker and keeper of culture, multidisciplinary artist, scholar, educator, storycrafter, and storyteller. Active largely in the 1990s until the 2010s. And she really brought to the Transgender Archives a decolonized understanding of gender and sexuality. Again, we have her material, some of the material available at the open house, including some of her performance art pieces. Her diaries, she was a big diary writer. And that's something that I know a lot of Indigenous scholars are coming into the Transgender Archive to look into, because she wrote about the tension that she felt about needing to access medical services while being an Indigenous person at the same time, and those tensions she spoke at in length in her diaries. So that's really precious material. We have textual records, graphics, recordings, garments, masks, animal bones, skins, and objects involved in her performance art. And she bequeathed her archives to the Transgender Archives in 2016. So she was actually, she was a keynote, planned to be a keynote at the 2016 Moving Trans History Forward conference. She was unwell and she unfortunately passed just a few weeks later. Red Jordan Oroboto actually is our last collection I'll talk about. Our most recent large collection, Red Jordan, and again, large display that you can see later today. American, lived mostly in San Francisco, a Black trans man. one of the earliest and most prolific writers of street lit. Mostly lived in poverty, and by the end of his life, Roboto had produced over 80 literary works, mostly about butch lesbians, trans men, erotica, sex work, and poverty. Really interesting readings. I encourage you again to come and really put your hands on that history. So I will end with this slide, but what did we contribute to the Clear Grant? And I have around 2 minutes to say that. So, Red Jordan Roboto, a selection of his self-published books, publication ephemera that came alongside those books, and some AV materials that are actually going to be up online very soon. So there's some documentary interviews of him sitting in, I believe, is his basement, talking about his artistic process. Really cool stuff. Also, the 3 Japanese serials from the Rikusen collection. So the serials are F to M Japan. So that's 27 issues of the Japanese language F to M magazine. Quarterly Japanese newsletter created in 1992. And the collection, it's a collection of articles, stories, news, advertisements, all geared towards transmasculine men in Japan. The second Japanese serial collection that is involved is called Queen. So Queen was a bi-monthly magazine from specifically about cross-dressers in Japan, and then more broadly transgender people more broadly, and published 1980 to 2004. And it was actually, Queen as a business, it was a mail order company selling women's underwear. And then the third Japanese serial is Takarazuka Review Script Collection. So it's a really interesting collection. So the Takarazuka Review, as some of you will surely know, the script collection, though, is a publication, a periodical, about the Takarazuka Review, which includes women playing men's roles. So while these roles and the individuals who plays these men's roles were not necessarily considered transgressive within the cultural context of Japan, and the individual themselves may or may not have identified as gender diverse, the Transgender Archives hold these materials because it's of interest to trans plus people. And the last one is, thank you, Esther, in the room here, is 1982 Katoi novel, Tongsei Thisam, The Third Pathway, and the author is Kiratri Shanar. And we digitized that material, and that was a part of the Clear Grant here. I'm happy to talk more later, and I'll pass it on.
Thank you, Michael. So I'll just preface this by apologizing for only having one paltry little slide for you all today. There's some issues with my schedule, but I hope you will just take a moment to maybe, close your eyes, rest. You could even look up our website, follow along that way. But I did want to just start out with a little bit of background about the center and the center archive. For those unfamiliar, I mentioned that we're in New York. We're located in the West Village, and one of the historic neighborhoods of New York. The center was founded in 1983, and it was a kind of coalition effort by many different gay organizations at the time to purchase a building and really stake our flag and have a community center that could last through, I'm happy to say, many decades of gentrification in the village. The archive itself was founded in 1990, so a few years after the center was up and running. And it was founded partly as an organic outcome to this kind of physical gathering place that the center provided. It was a space where many different groups, some of which are famous, some of which lesser known, but on the more famous side, groups like ACT UP were meeting at the center, groups like Salsa Soul Sisters or SAGE. These were all groups that were coming in and out of the center every week. And with that, as well as the different services that were on offer, specifically around healthcare and referrals, it became a kind of natural landing place for people's records during those early years of the AIDS crisis. And it was with that in mind that the archives was founded. Another kind of key aspect of the founding at that time period is there were two kind of hallmark programs being developed and supported by the center. So there was the formation of what became known as Youth Engagement Services, which was an early youth program for LGBTQ young people. It's typically thought of as around 13 through, I believe, 21 is the ages that we serve today. But this was a program that was really kicked off by the work of a group formed in about 1970 or 71 called Gay Youth of New York. And they were a youth-led group that came out of the gay liberation moment. So Youth Engagement Services was formed around 1990, and then the Gender Identity Project is the other program that I want to highlight. This was formed in 1989, and it's considered the one of the, if not the first, trans-led peer-led counseling and services program for trans folks in the U.S. And, you probably know Ricky Ann Wilkins and Rosalind Blumenstein. These are two women who were involved in this program. They led a robust series of internships that often the people who went through this program would end up working at the center in GIP. And I'll mention it again because it is one of my favorite contributions that we've made to the CLEAR project here. But so, as I said, the archives was formed, and it was a natural place for records that were being created at the center by center affiliated folks to preserve their records. And it is also a place that accepts records by LGBTQ folks related to New York. So I excerpted our mission statement so you can see that on the screen, but to give you a sense of the size of our collections, we have approximately 1,700 cubic feet of material, and we do measure in cubic feet because we store everything off-site, given that our building is from the mid-19th century, and is we're always battling for space as our staff grows. So we do store everything permanently off-site. And in addition to that size, we're actively collecting, so we need somewhere that we can grow into as well. Our collection strengths, I mentioned the necessity of collecting around the early AIDS crisis, so many of our founding collections relate to that, including various ACT UP chapters records. We have the papers of Michael Callan, who was an incredible central force in the People with AIDS movement, among many, many others. We also have strengths in the area of gay liberation in New York, so that 1970s period. And this I usually connect to the founding archivist's role, my predecessor, the amazing Richard Wandel, who himself was a member of the Mattachine Society as well as Gay Activists Alliance, and was very embedded in that gay liberation activism moment. In addition to that, we have a few other strengths I'll mention briefly. We have a kind of special strength in early gay public access television programs. So shout out for that, and you can find more on our website. And we also have a strength around a drag performance, as well as what I'll broadly call gender fuckery in public. So a couple of figures whose papers we have are Rollerina, as well as Jackie Curtis, and they were both figures in the downtown and queer scenes, not easily fitting into today's kind of definitions of transgender identity, but absolutely of great and deep interest for our research community. After the inimitable Richard Wandel, who I've already shouted out, retired, he had stewarded the archives for about 27 years as a volunteer. And so the center decided to seek funding for the archivist position, and I was hired in 2017 as the first staffed archivist. And I mentioned that to kind of get into my next point, which is that in my kind of taking on the mantle of this sort of both DIY community archives, but at the same time, like it carried some professionalization, given that my predecessor did get trained as an archivist after helping to found the archives. But taking on that mantle meant that my very early focus was around creating policy that didn't exist prior to me, as well as really shoring up sustainability. I didn't love the idea of carrying the archives on my own shoulders and needed to invest in bringing in other decision makers. So one of the first things I did was to organize an advisory group. And the advisory group consists of, at this time, it's 13 members, most of whom, at least at some point, were based in New York, though with the pandemic, some people did end up moving away, but they crisscross different disciplines, backgrounds, ages, races, genders, lived experiences. And these folks are in a decision-making role, as I mentioned, so they kind of operate often as a collections advisory group specifically, though they've also been involved in different areas of programming that I'll mention in a moment. But the kind of preeminent policy document that we created together is our collection development policy, and it's very much open to the public. So if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to share. And within that collection development policy, while we acknowledged our strengths, some of which I've mentioned, we also outlined our collecting priority areas. And this was with an eye toward racial and gender equity, acknowledging that most of the collections do relate to cis and gay and white experience amongst our community. So in the collection development policy, the three outlined priority areas for collecting are, I'll just briefly, it goes into more detail in the policy, but briefly say that they're related to collecting materials related to trans and gender expansive experience, material related to BIPOC experience, and if that is not a common acronym in BC, I'm not sure, but that stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And then the experience of immigrants and the children of immigrants to New York. So these are the three areas that allow me to work with our advisory group to say yes or no to donation offers usually. Now, do we have an acquisitions budget? No. So that does complicate what collecting can look like, and we can talk about that more in a moment. And if KJ, maybe you can give me a little nod when I'm approaching my time. So one thing I'll say about the ways that we've tried to trouble, if you will, the kind of typical path of archival collecting is by taking into account the position of the archives within a multi-service queer nonprofit that is, alternately fails and succeeds at servicing various areas of our community here in New York. I designed a program that was very heavily inspired by the work of our advisory group as well, that was funded by one of the cycles of the Mellon Community Archives call for proposals, right? This was a few years ago, and this project allowed us to team up with 3 grassroots organizations within New York to work with them in a post-custodial manner. So we learned from them, shared tools and resources from our vantage points as professional archivists, and learned what they were interested in terms of both safekeeping of their records, as well as how to share those with their membership or with the public. And there was no donation element to this project, so that was really important. And though the project itself is technically closed now, and we've no longer have our project coordinator, who is really key to keeping our meetings going, we do still have quite strong relationships with 3 of these organizations. So I did want to shout that out because I think I will talk about that later in our conversation. But of course, I need to mention some of my favorite materials that we've contributed through our partnership with the DTA. That includes the records related to the Gender Identity Project I mentioned earlier, some of which are not very accessible for researchers because they are within the center records, which is a little bit of a harder area to access than our special collections at the archives. And a lot of these records are audiovisual material. They're videos that the center recorded. And that the fact that we have partnered with the DTA without dams of our own, no way to really set up a digital repository at this point, means that we can actually get these not just digitized, but shared out. And highly recommend checking out the Gender Identity Project tag on the DTA. We also have been able to do a deep dive in the vast vertical files, which are arranged by organization in our collection, otherwise known as our organization files. Some of these organizations have multiple folders to them. Some have, one flyer in a folder, but thank God that's saved, or else there wouldn't necessarily be a record of this organization's existence. As well as a deep dive through our periodicals, which again are it's a vast area and extremely underdescribed. So this is giving a huge window into some of these magazines and newspapers that we hold. And finally, a very large collection that we've taken in the Randy Wicker and Marsha P. Johnson papers, which we'll talk about more. This was approximately 40 linear feet when we took it in. It has gone down a bit, but Randy Wicker is a longtime figure in the New York queer community. He has also had a hand in various movements, everything from legalizing cannabis to human cloning rights. You will have to access the collection to learn more about that latter one. But he is pretty well known in our circles as being close with and being roommates with Marsha P. Johnson. He also owned a lamp shop in on the Lower East Side that Sylvia Rivera worked at. So there's some intersections here with what KJ started us off with around the idea of who is holding these histories. We have, thanks to this donation, a small set of Marsha's personal papers, and I believe they're some of the only extant objects that she actually created. So somebody who is typically presented as a subject only. Now we have records that she's the record creator of, but we only have them because a white man was able to collect those and donate them to us. So with that note, I will round it off and kick it over to Raegan. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. I was just telling KJ in the chat that an ice storm has started here in Toronto, so hopefully my internet and power stays on. So the Archives, Canada's LGBTQ2+ Archives, was founded in 1973, so we're in our 52nd year. Originally named Canada's Gay Liberation Movement Archive, we were later the Canadian Gay Archive, and then the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archive. In our fourth name, we try and to be a little bit more inclusive to the collections that we do have. And the reality is that for 52 years, our collecting mandate has stayed the same: to collect material by and about LGBTQ2+ folks from across Canada, primarily about Canada, in any medium. And we do very much mean any medium. So our collections are divided into 4 parts. We've got reference, which is mostly vertical files and newspaper clippings. We've got a library catalog, or a library that has just shy of 30,000 different titles, including over 10,000 different periodicals. And then we have the the archive itself. There's over 200 described full, and that number continues to climb. And finally, museum artifacts and artwork. So while many see the archives, partly because of our name, as just an archive, the reality is that with over 6,500 individual artifacts, we're also the largest museum and artifact collection of queer and trans material in Canada, and probably right up there for North America as well. So there's a couple of things that I'd like to talk about today. One is that we're going to talk a little bit more about the organization and some of the changes that have happened over the last 10 years in terms of programming. And then we're going to turn to the material specifically that we digitized, and then talk a little bit about what was not digitized and why. So the organization right now has a collection development plan that was put in place in 2023 as part of our 50th anniversary. And this was built out of a collections review that took place in 2021 and 2022. No, 2020, yeah, 2021 and 2022. So this was a random selection of approximately 7 to 10% of our collections. And this included library, archive, and artifacts. The executive summary is available on our website, which is something that I know a lot of institutions do not do, but we did this with a third party for the sole intent and purpose of it being fully transparent. So the findings found that over 68% of our collection was white and primarily cis and men, about lots of men. So this was not a surprise. In fact, we thought the number might be quite a bit higher. And that was the primary reason we had started the collection review in the first place. The collection development plan makes a lot of statements, but there are 5 main goals, and most of them are around collecting and promoting the collection. So we want to grow our collection, programming, grow our users, partnerships, and visibility. And all of this has been actually very successful over the last 2 years. Our goals around collecting from high priority groups, which we have listed in detail, and high priority geographic and actually mediums as well, was super successful last year, where we had close to 40% of all of our donations from high priority groups. To give you an idea, previous years we were like happy if we had like 10%. That was a really exciting year. So we've made great strides on that front. But I think more importantly, 50% of the collections that came in last year were from new donors. So this means that the visibility part and the meeting new folks in different ways has been successful, growing those partnerships, growing the programming. Some of that has been about the ways we activate the collection. So increasing the number of programs that are more hands-on. So the creation of a zine making workshop, creation of a button making workshop, which activate the collections by usually youth focused. We're explaining the history of queer and trans zine making and showing the importance of buttons as part of political action, and then inviting them to make their own and to make duplicate material, or to make duplicates based out of the archival collections themselves. Those have been hugely successful, as has our queer trivia, which during the pandemic was online, but has moved to Glad Day Bookstore in Toronto since then. So our collection development plan is reported on yearly. Again, this is a part of our making ourselves accountable to the community and being transparent. So our 2024 annual report will come out in the next month or so, and we'll be able to show all the numbers around that. Luckily, we'll also be able to report that a record number of people are visiting our site. And some of that is thanks to partnerships like the one we have with the DTA. So visits to our digital exhibits has gone up over 80% in the last year. So that means that just shy of 25,000 individual people have signed in to look at the digital exhibits. And that's a very large number compared to the number of people that we can actually welcome into our space, because our house is a heritage building from the Victorian era and it is not fully accessible, and it's just a house that does not have enough space. So the more and more we're welcoming the majority of our visitors through digital means. And again, this is one of the main reasons why partnerships where funds are actually made available to digitize material have been so key to getting people engaged. So what are we digitizing? Next slide, please. So the main collection that we did digitize as part of the CLEAR grant was the collection of Rupert Raj. So Rupert Raj, for those that are less familiar, is a Eurasian, East Indian and Polish pansexual trans man who came out in the 1970s, specifically in the Ottawa community. He provided peer counseling, research and education for transsexual men and women in various communities, including Ottawa, Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto between 1971 and 1990. He was the founder of several trans organizations, including FACT, the Foundation for Advancement of Canadian Transsexuals, Metamorphosis Medical Research Foundation, and Gender Worker. So these are all material that are a part of what was digitized. Additionally, he founded 3 publications: Gender Review, Metamorphosis, and Gender Network. So the material that we have is really kind of in 3 parts. There's material from his early childhood, which includes early photographs of his family. These are really cute. Photos of Rupert as a small child. There is material from his professional career, specifically as a counselor, and the work that he did, and then the work around community organizing and his own transition. So these records that were digitized make up almost or just over 1,000 individual records. Some of those are multiple pages, they're various letters and documents that are a part of Metamorphosis or some of the other publications. The material of Rupert Raj, because of this grant that we were able to work with these folks with, now makes up about 1/3 of all of our online digital material. So it's a very large amount of Rupert that is represented on our collection. And finally, just to close things off, on the next page, we have why didn't we document some stuff, and we'll talk about that more in our in the next slide. So those are around restrictions, the size of the collections, and the types of material. So that'll be a part of our conversation moving forward. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to move us into conversation. We all went woefully over time. I will include myself in that. So we will not have as much time for conversation as we had hoped. And I do want to make sure we have a few minutes to talk about next steps. But with that in mind, I'll move us right into this question. And I just love this photo of Randy Wicker looking up at Sylvia Rivera, kissing her girlfriend, Julie Murray. So the question that I'll pose, and there's 5 questions that we can build toward, but perhaps the only one we'll have time to talk about is this first one. What are the impacts that white stakeholders have had, and I should say continue to have, in controlling BIPOC histories? Lou, maybe I can throw that one to you first, and then Raegan, maybe you want to jump in next.
Yeah, thanks, KJ, and I love this photo too. Yeah, I mean, one thing that comes to mind when I think about Randy Wicker as well as the Center Archive is housing alone. It seems so simple, but the fact that the center has a building that it owns means that the archives, though, you know, not from my perspective, we always need more funding, but we are essentially in a good place for sustainability. with Randy Wicker, his home in Hoboken over the years has been known as Hotel Wicker because he so frequently invited friends to live with him, or people who maybe were down on their luck for whatever moment. So he had a house that he could offer as well. And that's why we have now these papers of Marcia P. Johnson's, because she lived there for about 10 years. So when I think about the people that I'm in community with as an archivist who is currently collecting, one of the main kind of obstacles is related to housing instability, or simply income instability, right? And so, like one of the QT BIPOC led organizations that we partnered with on that kind of post-custodial archives project is based out of the Bronx, but they don't have a brick and mortar location. It's essentially an organization run by the founder out of her own home, while she maintains a day job and is raising a daughter. And this woman and I have become friends, and I probably could mention her name but won't, just out of consideration. But she runs a kind of essentially like a mutual aid organization for Black trans folks, particularly Black trans women like herself. And she is not able to provide, the space for people to come in and create work together or create artwork. Like, she works with a lot of artists, but it's just this sort of ongoing kind of race or battle with the various instabilities in a always gentrifying city. So that's what I think of first. And I'd like to hear what Raegan is thinking about too.
Yeah, for us, the organization, the archives itself was built out of the Body Politic magazine newspaper, which folks will hopefully be familiar with. And, that was a very white and cis organization. The collective that organized there became the collective that organized the archive. And so, again, it was a very white volunteer base that had the time, power, and, frankly, the finances to be able to spend time volunteering in our institution. And so while we did have BIPOC volunteers, they were by no means the majority or even controlled a large part of the decision making. So, the collecting the homophilia is really kind of the base of our collection. The fact that it is built out of that white, cis, male, colonial white supremacist background, we have had to do a lot of work to kind of show that the BIPOC community can have a space and deserves a space inside our building. And I think that it's been tricky because of that really extensive, 50 years of the organization being primarily white, to have those conversations, especially when we are so cash strapped that inviting BIPOC folks in without being able to provide the appropriate funding to support those projects would be super problematic.
And Michael, I don't know if you wanted to jump in at all.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, first time I saw the question, but I'm happy to take a crack at it. I'm sure Lara would give a different answer, but I'll take a crack at it. So yeah, Aaron, Lara, and I often talk about the four hurdles, and I'm surely there's more hurdles, but the four hurdles that are a barrier for folks to see their materials in the Transgender Archives. So even though we have 23 countries represented, our biases is European and North American English materials, textual materials of the mid to late 20th century. So what are those four hurdles? And again, surely there's more, but the first one is that processes of colonization and white supremacy tell BIPOC people their stories don't matter, and that, in fact, these processes actively destroy the stories, right? So that obviously is a major hurdle for BIPOC folks to see their material and their stories in the Transgender Archives. The second hurdle that we talk about is it's a class hurdle. So again, remembering that the Trans Archives has a bias for mid-century to late 20th century textual paper materials, it took money to get these materials printed. This is before digital stuff, remember? So it took money to do that, and it took a relationship with a printing press that was okay to print these materials, because in a lot of places, this was obscene materials at the time. So, you know, you couldn't just walk up to a printing press and be like, hey, let's print this stuff. So that's hurdle number 2. Hurdle number 3 that we talk about is a housing hurdle. So precarious housing really stops folks from collecting materials. So if you know, born and raised in a house for 30 years and you have a basement of, you know, 20 banker boxes of your material, yeah, you get to think about donating it when you're thinking about your legacy later on in life. Conversely, if you're moving from apartment to apartment to apartment, you know, every few months or whatever, you ain't carrying around these banker boxes. So, and what do you do with those materials? Most of the time they hit the trash. So that's the third hurdle that we talk about. And the fourth one is trust. So let's just say you get over all these hurdles and you're coming to thinking about your legacy, end of life kind of stuff. Where do I donate this material? Who do I trust? Where do I donate? Is it a community archive? Is it an institutional archive? And with the Transgender Archives, those trust chains came in through Dr. Aaron DeVore and through the relationships at UVic Libraries and UVic as a whole. Now, those people only have chains with certain folks and certain communities. So it's not like Aaron's trust chains covers all different demographics. It covers his trust chains. So, and that's what we try to do as the chair over the past 10 years, is to build those relationships, even though that process will never end, to build those relationships so that we can build a relationship with, let's say, folks like Cyrus Marcus Ware, who is integral to getting Ayanna Marikel to want to donate her collections to us. So that's a long process of building relationships to try to diversify our collections that 100% have biases in it. That's my kick at the can.
Michael, that was so good. Thank you. What a beautiful summary, and I love the points. So I will just quickly add to this that one thing that has become really remarkably clear through my work with the Digital Trans Archive is just how systemic this is in answering this question. So we work with over 90 archives, and I can count on one hand how many have people of color in meaningful positions of power. And that is striking when you just think about the impacts that that has on everything that Michael has just mentioned. So I just wanted to sort of put that in there as we're moving into the next segment. So I promise we will have plenty of time for questions, which means that we need to wrap up within 3 minutes. So we're not going to answer any additional questions that are on here. If you can move us forward, Michael, to next steps, I just want to give everyone 1 minute to jump in with what they're thinking about moving forward for next steps. Raegan, maybe you can start us there.
So one of the things that we are doing at the archives is that we have specifically pledged that over 80% of our programming funding will go to high collection or high priority groups, a large part of which are BIPOC and trans folks. So that's us not able to put like an actual number because our budget is what it is, but we can say that what we do have and what we are able to gather, we're going to spend at least 80% of it towards making sure those collections are safe and those collections can come in.
Thank you. Lou, 1 minute.
Yeah, well, we recently evaluated our collecting development policy with our advisory group on its 5-year evaluation period, and we came to the conclusion that while we have been making strides, we are not where we want to be. So we've reified those priorities and we'll continue making decisions around that. In a way that is less about metrics, though, I will say that personally and alongside my archivist, that is only our second ever archivist at the center, we are just investing in relationship building. So just continuing to spend time and to be at events and to organize those that we're able to, that are based in trans and our BIPOC communities both.
And Michael.
Again, first time I'll take another kick at this. But yeah, I think Lara would talk about capacity and the limitations that UVic Libraries is just able to have, and that it's so important to build relationship with, when we're at the University of Victoria, organizations like the chair, because like I mentioned before, the reason why we were able to get or for Ayanna to feel comfortable to donate her materials was through Cyrus and folks like that, and that only happened because of these relationships between the libraries and the chair. And then the other thing I'm thinking of is that participating like excitedly in projects like this one with the CLEAR project is that, you know, we were, I don't know the exact story, but I know KJ approached us, and keeping in mind that capacity question, I know Lara really wanted to do this. So, and it encouraged us because we needed encouragement. So this project really helped encourage us, look at the collections, think about it more, work with scholars like Esther in the room here, and there was a Japanese scholar we worked with when it came to the Japanese periodical collections I mentioned, to broaden those relationships. So happy to talk more, but that's where I'll end it.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. And just by way of wrapping up, with respect to the Digital Trans Archive, I would say that we're coming out of this 3-year grant project with a really transformed project. It has fundamentally changed the way that we approach our collecting by shifting our mission, shifting our collecting scope, building up new infrastructures and protocols, and also really deepening our relationships, and not only with our partners who we're collaborating with, but all kinds of folks beyond that. I will also say that we have developed new practices to increase visibility of BIPOC collections that are accessible through the DTA, and we will continue to do that. And the last thing that we're really working on is prioritizing trans BIPOC materials in our future collecting. So though this has been a focus for the past 3 years, we are not now done. In fact, quite the opposite, that we are going to continue to prioritize this in future partnerships and digitization initiatives. So with that, I will move us into Q&A. I hope you can see how abundant how many things we have to say about this and how passionate we are about this work.